Welcome to Twisted Truths, where betrayal meets brutal payback, and where the most unexpected twists expose what people are really capable of. This story isn't just shocking, it's personal. My name is Thomas Harrington, and if you'd asked me 5 years ago who I was, I would have said, the mistake my family never let go of. I'm 34 now. I live in Minneapolis. And tonight, like so many others, I sit here alone, watching the lights of the city shimmer off Lake Calhoun through the rain-streaked windows of my apartment. It's quiet now. Peaceful, even. But that peace was earned in the most twisted way. My story doesn't begin with money. Or power. It begins with blame. Endless, relentless blame. I was the firstborn son in a wealthy family that never wanted me to lead, only to take the fall. My father, Richard Harrington, was a towering figure in the automotive world. Harrington Industries, his empire, was once Minnesota's crown jewel. He was respected in boardrooms and feared in conference halls. At home, though, he was something else entirely. My mother, Carolyn, was soft-spoken but complicit, more afraid of rocking the boat than protecting her child. And then there was Michael. My younger brother. The golden one. The apple of my father's eye. Charming, bold, and shameless. He knew early on that if something went wrong, all he had to do was cry or lie, and I'd take the heat. And I did. For broken vases. For ruined holidays. For a totaled Porsche when I wasn't even in the state. Every time something went wrong, the default reaction was, "Thomas, what did you do?" At first, I defended myself. Then I stopped trying. I thought if I just kept my head down and worked hard, they'd see. One day, they'd notice I wasn't the screw-up. I was their salvation. I graduated top of my class at the University of Minnesota with a finance degree. I got offers from Fortune 500 firms. But when my father called me back, saying, "The family needs you," I caved. I came home. Back to the mansion. Back to Harrington Industries. Back to the lies. He gave me the title of CFO, but no respect. I walked into that boardroom like a rookie intern while Michael, who had failed upward more times than I could count, was given the reins as CEO. Michael called me the bean counter. Father said I was too cautious for leadership. And every time something failed, every deal Michael messed up, I was the one dragged in to fix it, then blamed for the mess. But I stayed. Because part of me, the pathetic part, still wanted them to say, "We were wrong about you, Thomas." That day never came. What did come, was the final betrayal. 3 months ago, the company hit a wall. A major deal with an overseas partner fell through. Our stock plummeted. We were bleeding millions by the hour. The board was panicking. I worked night and day on a restructuring plan, cutting costs, selling non-core assets, negotiating loan extensions. It was clean. Legal. Effective. But it wasn't what my father wanted. "Cook the books," he said. "Just for this quarter. Inflate the profit line. We'll bring in a new investor before anyone notices." I stared at him, my heart pounding. "Dad, that's fraud." He didn't blink. "It's survival." Michael leaned in, smirking like a hyena. "Unless you're too scared, big brother." That was the moment I realized they would burn everything, and blame me for the ashes. And that's when something inside me snapped. I walked out of my father's office that night with shaking hands and fire in my chest. I'd always suspected he didn't see me as a man. But hearing him ask me, his own son, to commit fraud just to clean up Michael's mess made it clear, I wasn't even a person to him. I was a tool. A shield. A name to scribble on a document if things went wrong. I went home and sat in the dark for hours, staring at my laptop. Not working. Just staring. My heart was racing, but my mind was numb. What haunted me most wasn't what they asked. It was the fact that I actually hesitated. A part of me, still desperate for their approval, thought. Maybe if I do this, they'll finally say I saved the company. Maybe then, I'd matter. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. I couldn't be the one who broke the law to protect people who'd never protected me. The next morning, I submitted an official memo to the board declining to approve the falsified documents. I attached my restructuring proposal. It was precise, strategic, and painfully honest. But I knew what would happen. And I was right. 3 hours later, Michael stormed into my office, flanked by 2 executives. His voice was calm, but his eyes were wild. "Dad's furious. He says you're sabotaging the company. This plan? It's too little, too late." I looked up from my screen. "It's the only legal option left, Michael." He leaned in close, voice dropping to a hiss. "You always wanted this company. You think if you play the hero, they'll hand it to you. You're not built for this. You're weak. Always have been." He left without giving me a chance to speak. Later that day, I was pulled into a meeting with HR. They stripped me of my signing authority. Removed me from financial decision-making. And gave my responsibilities to a new consultant hired by Michael. No formal demotion. No announcement. They just erased me. I became a ghost in the office I helped hold together. The final blow came that Friday. My access badge failed at the garage entrance. Then again at the front desk. I called security. "Sorry, Mr. Harrington. You've been removed from the system." No warning. No explanation. Just, deleted. I drove home in silence, my grip on the steering wheel white-knuckled. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was just, exhausted. Everything I had endured since childhood, every insult, every dismissal, every lie, they all led here. Cast out of the company I saved. Betrayed by the family I bled for. That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the city lights through the rain-streaked window, asking myself one question over and over again. Was it all for nothing? Then I thought of my grandfather. Henry Harrington. The man who built the company from the ground up. Who taught me when I was young that honesty mattered, even when it hurt. What would he think of what Harrington Industries had become? No. This wasn't for nothing. They had buried the wrong son. And now, I was done waiting for justice. I was going to make it myself. I always thought revenge was about rage. But that night, as I sat alone in my apartment, no badge, no title, no respect, I didn't feel rage. I felt cold. Focused. Clear. Because in the silence, I remembered something. Something no one else seemed to notice. While Michael and my father were busy playing power games, I was the one who had quietly restructured our digital infrastructure. I had access to every financial footprint, shareholder registry, and, most importantly, stock activity logged over the past year. And I'd seen the signs. They were dumping shares. Michael and my father had been offloading stock quietly for months to cover the debts Michael created from that disastrous China deal. They were using dummy firms to move blocks of shares without triggering panic. They thought they were clever. But I tracked every single one. And in that moment, a blueprint formed in my mind, not for revenge fueled by destruction, but for strategic reclamation. I pulled up the shareholder report. 49% of Harrington Industries' equity had been sold off, scattered among small private holders, mid-tier hedge funds, and foreign investors. Most of them had no loyalty to my father. All they cared about was the bottom line. And none of them wanted to see their investment collapse. If I could quietly buy up enough of that stock, if I could rally just 15% more, I could trigger a board vote. A vote that could fire Michael. Strip my father of power. And put someone, anyone, else in charge. I needed help. I picked up the phone and called the only person in my family who ever looked me in the eye and saw me. Uncle Dean. My dad's younger brother. The black sheep. He left the company 15 years ago after an argument with my father that no one talked about. Now he ran a small logistics firm outside of town. Quiet, modest, forgotten. He answered on the second ring. "Thomas," he said, his voice surprised but warm. "You all right?" I almost broke down right there. "No," I whispered. "But I have a plan." That Sunday, we met in the back booth of a half-empty diner off I-35. He wore a worn leather jacket, and his hair was streaked with gray. But his eyes? Sharp as ever. He listened without interruption as I explained everything, the fake accounting request, the stock fire sale, the ghosting from HR. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "I always knew Richard would destroy what your grandfather built. But I never thought he'd try to use you as kindling." Then he reached across the table and laid his hand over mine. "You want to take the company back?" I swallowed. "I want to save what's left of it. But I can't do it alone." He smiled, small and dangerous. "You won't." Over the next 3 days, we formed a plan. Dean had contacts, investors, lawyers, quiet money. And I had the insider knowledge. Together, we began building a shell company called Northgate Capital. It would act as our proxy to buy up shares without raising suspicion. We'd move in stealth. First, acquire 9% through smaller individual purchases. Then another 6% through 3 minor firms Dean had influence over. Once we hit 15%, we could petition for a board vote under Harrington bylaws. We just needed to keep it quiet until we were ready. I went back to work. Not in the office, but from my apartment. Mapping everything. Timing trades. Watching for openings. Coordinating with Dean nightly. And in the middle of it all, was a single thought. This isn't about revenge anymore. It's about legacy. My grandfather built this company with integrity. My father twisted it into a monument of ego. Now, I would fight, not to be seen by them, but to honor the one man who believed in me when I was a boy. The blueprint was in motion. And the House of Harrington was about to feel its first crack. People think revenge is loud. That it roars in courtrooms or screams in confrontations. But real revenge, the kind that sticks, is quiet. It moves in silence. Like mist through a battlefield. And by the time your enemies realize what's happening, they've already lost. That's who I became. The ghost they forgot could haunt them. Every day for the next 4 weeks, I lived 2 lives. By day, I was a disgraced CFO, out of the company, a non-threat, the screw-up brother nobody had to worry about anymore. But by night, I was in control of Northgate Capital, quietly buying up shares of Harrington Industries at record low prices. They didn't even notice. Because they were too busy blaming each other. My father was in damage control mode, frantically calling banks and PR firms, trying to save face. Michael, meanwhile, was playing CEO, spouting nonsense about aggressive expansion while the company bled cash. Uncle Dean and I used it to our advantage. I knew every weakness in the system. Every time they sold off another chunk of stock to stay afloat, we snapped it up. Bit by bit. And with each block we acquired, I felt something I hadn't in years. Power. Not over people. But over my own story. Sarah, a former colleague from the accounting department, reached out quietly one night. She'd heard the rumors, how I was fired, how Michael had taken over. But she didn't believe it. "You were the only one who actually knew what was going on," she said. I didn't tell her everything. But I asked if she'd help. Quietly. Off the record. She agreed. Together, we reviewed the company's financials from the outside, through investor disclosures and supplier data. What we found was worse than I expected. Michael had authorized a new luxury headquarters, during a financial freefall. He had also cut employee health benefits to reduce overhead. And the kicker? He sold the company jet to himself through a holding company, at 30% of its value. It wasn't just bad leadership. It was abuse. We compiled every violation, every reckless move. We built a dossier, a ticking bomb of incompetence and corruption. Dean and I met in an empty warehouse outside the city, which he used as storage for his logistics company. There, we outlined the final stage. Step 1. Trigger a special shareholders meeting. Once Northgate crossed the 15% ownership threshold, we could legally demand it. Step 2. Use the dossier to rally the remaining shareholders. Show them who Michael really was, and how my father enabled him. Step 3. Call for a vote of no confidence to remove both from leadership. It wasn't just bold. It was surgical. But timing was everything. If my father caught wind, he'd call in favors. Buy back shares. Use threats, charm, or guilt. So we waited. Until the moment Northgate Capital hit 18.7% stake in the company. It was time. We sent the letter to the board and the major shareholders. It included the meeting date, the agenda, and a copy of the full financial dossier. The fallout was immediate. I got a call from Michael an hour after the notice went out. "Thomas, what the hell are you doing?" I didn't raise my voice. "I'm doing what you never could, Mike. Cleaning up your mess." He was silent for a moment. Then he laughed, a dry, bitter sound. "You're gonna regret this." But I already didn't. Because I was finally standing up for the kid they always blamed. For the young man they tried to erase. For the leader they never saw coming. The morning of the shareholders' meeting, Minneapolis was wrapped in a cold mist, like the world was holding its breath. So was I. I stood in front of my closet for what felt like an hour. My hands hovered over suits, over button-downs, over ties that used to feel like nooses. But today wasn't about dressing to impress. It was about walking into that boardroom with one truth. I didn't need their approval anymore. I needed justice. I wore a simple gray suit. No designer label. No flash. Just solid, clean, and deliberate, like the numbers I'd spent my life defending. Uncle Dean picked me up outside my apartment in his aging black Cadillac. The same car he'd refused to replace for years. "You don't junk what still works," he used to say. That morning, I understood the sentiment more than ever. "Ready to take your seat at the table?" he asked. I nodded, jaw clenched. This time, I'm not sitting quietly. We arrived at Harrington Industries just before 9 a.m. The old glass building, once a symbol of power, now looked brittle in the fog. The lobby receptionist didn't recognize me at first. When she did, her eyes widened. "You've been reinstated?" I didn't answer. Just walked past her. Because it didn't matter whether I had a badge. In an hour, I'd own the building. The boardroom was packed. Investors, executives, legal representatives, even some press in the hallway. The air buzzed with tension. At the head of the table sat my father. Stiff-backed. Jaw tight. Eyes cold. Beside him, Michael looked like he hadn't slept in days. He wore a crisp navy suit, but his collar was slightly crooked. That told me everything I needed to know. He was rattled. My father began the meeting, voice sharp and rehearsed. "We've called this gathering under duress. False claims have been circulated by an entity known as Northgate Capital. Let me be clear, these claims are nothing but distraction." He went on for 10 minutes, painting Michael as a visionary under pressure, downplaying the losses, the missteps, the missing millions. Then Uncle Dean stood up. No drama. No microphone. Just calm fire in his voice. I'm Dean Harrington. Former board member. Co-founder. And co-owner of Northgate Capital. He paused. The room shifted. And this, he gestured toward me, is my nephew, Thomas. The man your leadership betrayed, humiliated, and tried to erase. Today, we're here because we believe the company can be saved, but not by those who destroyed it. He handed out the dossier. One by one, heads turned as they read. Michael's fraud. The private jet sale. The slashed health benefits. Every single number was backed by documents. Every accusation corroborated. Then it was my turn. I stepped forward. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't crack. 3 months ago, I was asked to falsify reports to cover a failed international deal. I refused. That's why I was removed. That's why I was erased. But I didn't come here to reclaim my old job. I came here to offer a future. I handed out my restructuring plan, the one they ignored. It included asset liquidation timelines, sustainable cost reductions, a confirmed capital infusion from a German partner I had personally negotiated with, a pathway to profitability in under 18 months. And then I said it. I'm asking for a vote of no confidence. To remove Richard Harrington as chairman. And Michael Harrington as CEO. Silence. Then murmurs. Then voices rising in support, and in fury. My father stood up, eyes burning. This is a coup, he hissed. You're just a scared little boy who couldn't handle pressure. I met his gaze, steady. No. I'm the man you never made space for. The man who cleaned your mess in silence. And the man who's about to take back what you lost. A few minutes later, the vote was held. One by one, the hands went up. When the final count was read, the room fell into stunned quiet. 58% in favor. Michael dropped his pen. My father looked as though someone had carved the air out of his lungs. It was over. I had done it. The son they tried to bury, had just taken the throne. They left the boardroom like ghosts. My father didn't speak. Didn't glare. Didn't even try to argue. He just stood, straightened his jacket like it still meant something, and walked out, with Michael stumbling behind him, pale and silent. The room slowly emptied, and I was left alone with the echoes. It was done. But I didn't feel triumphant. I felt raw. Like I'd torn something out of my chest and handed it to the world, hoping it would finally understand. Uncle Dean clapped me on the shoulder. You did it, kid. You took back the name. But even as he smiled, something gnawed at me. Something wasn't finished. 2 weeks later, that something walked through my new office door. It was Margaret, my grandfather's old estate attorney. Thin, composed, but sharp-eyed like she'd been waiting for years. I heard what you did, she said, setting a sealed envelope on my desk. This was left with me years ago. By your grandfather. I blinked. Wait. What is this? She looked me dead in the eye. His real will. Unedited. Untouched. And unread. Until the company changed hands. My heart dropped. Everyone believed Richard, your father, had full control after your grandfather passed. But Henry Harrington left an addendum. A clause that required the next generation of leadership to prove integrity before accessing, well, everything else. I opened the envelope slowly, my hands ice cold. Inside was a letter. Written in my grandfather's tight, elegant handwriting. Thomas, if you're reading this, it means you did what I always prayed you'd have the strength to do. Stand for what's right, even when it costs you everything. I saw you. Even when your father didn't. This company was meant for those who carry its name with pride, not ego. As such, I've placed a controlling trust in your name, effective immediately upon a board vote removing your father. You now own 51% of Harrington Industries. I froze. Not only had I taken back the company, I owned it. Not just in shares. Not just in title. In legacy. Tears welled up before I could stop them. All those nights I stayed up wondering if I mattered to anyone. All those childhood moments where I swallowed lies, just to survive another day. He'd seen it. He'd known. I called Uncle Dean that night. I read him the letter. He didn't speak for a long while. Then he whispered, Henry was always 5 steps ahead. But he knew only one person in this family had the backbone to do what had to be done. And it was never Richard. I slept well that night. For the first time in decades. Not because I'd won. But because I finally understood. My worth was never theirs to define. And now, the final act of justice was near. The next board meeting was different. I walked into the room not as a guest. Not as an assistant. Not even as a CFO. I walked in as the owner. The men who once ignored me now stood when I entered. The same executives who once laughed under their breath when I spoke now scribbled down every word I said. Funny how fast power changes the air in a room. But I didn't gloat. I didn't punish anyone who'd stood silent while I was pushed out. I just did my job. I implemented the restructuring plan with full authority. I reinstated employee benefits. I cancelled the ridiculous luxury headquarters project. I sold off unnecessary assets and restructured debt with the banks, who were more than happy to deal with someone honest for a change. And slowly, the company began to breathe again. But there was one piece left. My father and Michael had vanished from the public eye. They issued a press release about stepping back to reflect. Typical. Until the day they showed up at the corporate office. They didn't expect security to stop them at the door. What do you mean we can't enter? My father snapped. You no longer have clearance, the guard said calmly, eyes scanning the clipboard. Per new executive order. They demanded a meeting with me. I granted it. They walked into my new office, the same one that once belonged to my father. Michael looked like he hadn't slept. My father looked smaller, like a monument collapsing under its own weight. He didn't speak for a moment. Just looked around the room. Then he said it. You always wanted this, didn't you? I stood. Calm. Steady. No, I replied. I wanted to be seen. I wanted to help. I wanted to be a son. You made it impossible. He scoffed. So what now? You throw us out like garbage? I didn't flinch. I didn't throw you out. You gave it away. Every lie. Every insult. Every corner you cut. That wasn't me. That was all you. Michael finally spoke. You're going to regret this. I walked to the window, overlooking the city, and said quietly, no. I already regretted not doing it sooner. They left. Not with a bang. Not with violence. But with silence. And that was more satisfying than any revenge fantasy I'd ever imagined. It's been a year now. Harrington Industries is profitable again. The shareholders are happy. The employees finally feel safe. And the legacy my grandfather built is no longer sinking under the weight of ego. As for me, I live in the same apartment. Still drink the same cheap coffee. But I walk differently. I breathe differently. Because I finally understand. You don't have to shout to be strong. You don't have to beg to be seen. You just have to stand, quietly, firmly, for what's right. And sometimes, when no one believes in you, you fight anyway. Not because they're wrong, but because you are finally right with yourself. In the end, truth has a way of surfacing, even if it comes twisted through pain and betrayal. As one wise voice once said, Sometimes your greatest enemy was once your closest ally. If this story struck a chord with you, let us know in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, share, and spread the word, because justice deserves to be heard.